I think, Minjal, you were saying that this was pre-vulcanized or
Yes.
other before vulcanization, right?
As in, this is the rubber that's used in this eraser. This eraser included
Yes.
will not be vulcanized.
It's not vulcanized.
But
How did they know to call it that before vulcanization? Hello and welcome to Stationery Test Drive, where every week we take stationery tools that are ordinary, extraordinary, and just delightful and take them on test drives. I'm Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal, and today we're looking at small suitcases, but also the Faber-Castell Kneaded Erasers.
The Kneaded Eraser in German, and I'm sure I'm completely mispronouncing that. So if you're German, please.
You just insulted someone's family.
Yeah. This is a kneadable art eraser. Now, we are artists and designers and calligraphers and illustrators and all sorts of things. And so we are quite familiar with the kneadable art eraser, or at least the type of eraser that it is. Samir, why don't you and Minjal tell us about what these are?
So from whatever I've managed to kind of read about these erasers, they are made of unvulcanized rubber. Is that right? And they're supposed to be more pliable. You know, they can be stretched. They can be shaped into, say, like really flat surfaces. They can be shaped into pointed edges. You know, they're not firm like, the normal erasers that we're used to using.
For comparison's sake, this is a normal eraser that we have covered on the show, the Nataraj Plasto. A nice, very good eraser that we used in that episode and that we still use every day. This is our... But this one certainly has its uses. Like Minjal said, you can smooth it out. You can roll it and get a nice... Look at the way it doesn't pick up everything. And you can layer it, you can roll it, you can smudge it. And yeah, in some ways it's as much an artistic application medium as it is an erasing medium for me.
Yeah. I think when we tested out the Nataraj, most of us kind of lent into the fact that we were kind of drawing with the eraser rather than kind of just erasing things. And I think this is more so useful for that way of using it than anything else, which is that you're trying to actually draw or make the art with it rather than just get rid of something.
Yes, and because of the sort of the texture of it, the soft texture, it doesn't fully erase. And we'll try to zoom in on this and see. But like the line that the hard eraser takes out is pretty much on this, the Rhodia pad, which we have covered before. And these are lines that I put down in there. So, that's, let's say, a normal line weight that you don't think of erasing. The hard eraser removes all of the graphite. And this one sort of still leaves a faint glow or a trace of graphite.
Yeah.
And we can use that to our advantage as artists. It may not be something you need when you actually want to erase.
Yes, I mean this is an artistic tool, not a correction tool.
It's also fun to play with.
It's almost like plasticine, isn't it?
It's softer than plasticine. I think most plasticine I've used has a certain, at least, oiliness, and this one is more like chewing gum.
Yeah.
Like the nicest chewing gum you almost wish this was edible and flavored, so you could just maybe chew on it for a bit.
We'll get into the specifics of this particular one, but I think this is, of all the kneaded erasers I've used, this is one of the softest and most flexible that I've...
Well, first of all, these ones are new. And yes, the ones that I've used have been a bit harder.
A little harder.
And they get hard over time. In fact, they get to the point where they almost seize up and become like hard blocks, but not quite.
Yeah.
So yeah, Minjal, you made an ancient hand axe out of yours.
The way it picks up the graphite actually is quite wonderful. And there are no like eraser, residue. There's no residue.
Oh
at
yes,
all
that's
with-
the other thing.
with
You're not
this
there.
eraser.
There are no rubbings.
There are no rubbings.
None of that stuff to brush off, because it is more or less one piece and one blob, and you can put some googly eyes on it. Maybe we should do that next time and call it your friend. The chewable part is actually interesting, because I think in French it actually says gomme mie de pain, and as far as my very horrible rudimentary French is, that has something to do with bread, and that's not a coincidence, is it?
No, because when graphite was first discovered and pencils started being used as a writing instrument, and we have covered some of this history before, the first things that were used as erasers were generally
Bread.
little crusty pieces of bread. And people would actually knead the white part of the bread into various shapes to erase graphite. So in some ways, this is a more original form of the eraser than the one we have today.
It makes sense. I'm sure that I think, Minjal, you were saying that this was pre-vulcanized or
Yes.
other before vulcanization, right?
As in, this is the rubber that's used in this eraser. This eraser included
Yes.
will not be vulcanized.
It's not vulcanized.
But
How did they know to call it that before vulcanization?
the way erasers were invented, so to speak, was actually that scientists and artists at the time would have been playing with things like rubber, which is a new import from
The New World, right?
from the New World. And this is also around the time when graphite was being used and people were using bread to erase their graphite. And probably at some point, someone dropped their little eraser piece of bread, picked up a piece of rubber instead, and found that it was doing a better job. And back then, that piece of rubber would have been not vulcanized, because vulcanization came later.
Yes.
So this is literally the first kind of rubber that was used as an eraser, which is something that could be shaped.
Well, there's bread and there's rubber, but we are neither a cooking show nor really a crafting show, although we do that sometimes. What we do every week is test drives, and Minjal, you have done a wonderful test drive with this. That is quite lovely. I know that you've had some misgivings about it, so why don't you tell us more about it? While we keep
Some misgivings is the best euphemism we've ever used on the show.
Well, it sticks like this it is.
So while my experience with this particular eraser was that it's not really meant for beginners. While it may look like a really soft, moldable, piece of clay that you have in your hand, it's really not, something that...
Would you like to test on that instead of your...
No, it's okay. Like what I basically did
okay.
was
Right,
And for someone like I don't really use a lot of makeup, but I'm sure people who use makeup, the technique is to just dab it. You dab and you just pull off some of the graphite.
Kids, this is not the kind of dabbing that you're seeing on screen right now, if you can find a copyright-free version.
Did I miss out on some memo there about dabbing?
That's okay, we're too
We
old.
miss out on all the memos. It's okay.
So my experience was that, like Vishal said, I still prefer the trusty Natraj eraser for a lot of,
If you saw our episode on it, and if you want our recommendation, yes, this is the best cheap eraser you can get. It's a very versatile thing, but it's not going to give you that kind of... I could
not get this kind of very subtle,
there's no
shading
way.
with this eraser. It's not possible.
There's
not
no way
with,
you can get that with any hard eraser.
Not with the Tombow or anything else. But sure, as a lettering artist, I was thinking how much, would a lettering artist really use this kind of an eraser.
But the effects that you have gotten with it, where these literally look like ribbons made of pencil, is an effect that I think more letterers should use.
You can hazard a guess at this if you have great pencil control, so where you sort of build up to this level of gradation.
But it's never going to be as...
And I think all of us leaned into that. Did it? I certainly did in my test drive. which is this. And yeah, it in the same way that I think we've all done. I put down with this, the Apsara Extra Dark Platinum, which we have done an episode of again. It's a great pencil. It puts down a good medium to dark graphite line. And so I drew, of course, the lines on it, and then I put down an even layer. And then I used just a tiny piece which has now gotten discolored. I just went in and rolled or made a little sausage and then just sort of rolled that across. Or, even just made the actual shape. Some of these, I very specifically chose these muscle shapes. So you can literally, it's a piece of sculpture in some ways where you can sculpt it to the muscle you want to erase. And then erase it that way. And yeah, there is no other way I can think of other than, like I said, building up to it. But even then, building up, you get hard edges, you will get a total highlight, which in some ways I didn't want in this one. If I wanted that, I would have used this, and I was tempted to use this, but I think it's fine without it. It has a certain quality that I'm not going to get out of hard erasers, or even of building up things, other than maybe, and it's not even quite like wash, because you can see sort of the edges of the erasing line. Sometimes I did wick it away.
So do you usually use the kneaded eraser in your work a lot?
I have used them before, but again in pretty limited quantities. It's like you said, to take things out like this, or when I have a heavily shaded thing and I don't want to just go in and fully erase to zero, so to speak.
Right.
But I just want to take off that first layer. Sometimes it's just it's a bad mark, there's an extra line that's gone down, and then I just want to take that off like that. And then see, it goes off without disrupting the whole thing. Whereas if I went in like this, let's just say as an example, you do get, and it's subtle, but you get a harder.
You can see a line.
You can get a divot of white there, which you don't always want.
There's an observation I'm making just after seeing both of these together. We don't generally see these pieces of work before we start shooting these videos. So this is the first time I'm seeing these two pieces together. This is the closest I have ever seen to a physical medium looking like a digital painting in both of your cases. There's a certain smooth transition to these letters, or the way those muscles are shaded.
Having used some digital painting or done some digital painting, yes, I would agree. It is a bit like when you take your standard soft round airbrush and set it to a erase. It does give you those
there's almost kind of a rendered look to it, which I'm not used to seeing in traditional media, and it's a great.
Funnily enough, before I landed on this drawing, I thought of doing the very standard exercise of a sphere and trying to figure out the chiaroscuro of it, and but then I figured muscles sort of are the same thing, but in practice, and they're more fun to draw certainly than spheres. I've never been too fond of that exercise, other than in just testing out pens in tiny.
And the guy looks like he could be sculpted out of a putty eraser.
And he has a WWE belt.
No, that is pure good elastic. You need that to hold up your pants. But I think Samir, you have done something that is quite different from all of these. Now that I look at, like you said, we look at these together.
Yes, because I chose to go in a much more sort of traditional drawing route, and I also used rougher paper, which is why I think these two have such a smooth kind of almost digital look.
Yeah.
So I went for this, which unlike these two uses a rougher cartridge paper. And I just thought that a sort of a more traditional pencil portrait was one of the best tests of a kneaded eraser. I have used it for that before, but a long time ago. This is definitely, as I said, the softest kneaded eraser that I've used, and sure, this will harden up over time.
But you can. I have heard that you can revive these in some form. You can even clean them out. almost by like kneading them with some kind of soap.
Yeah, I think people do try things like that, but
we
I
should
think
with these pieces at least.
Most people, of course, this is just inexpensive enough that once it starts to go really saturated, people just stop using it.
Yeah, these aren't the most they're not expensive. They're not as cheap as something like the hard Nataraj one that we have, but
exactly. So what I did here was to lay out the basic drawing using the Staedtler Mars Lumograph, which we have covered before. 4B and a 6B for getting some variety in the shade. I actually did a fairly basic drawing and then just kind of went over it with an even tone. Darkened some of the bits that needed to be darkened in the background. And then a lot of the lighter shades. So the face started with a almost even grey tone over it. So all of the light parts of the face are actually just ticked up with this.
Mm-hmm.
And every light little section of the hair to give it that very almost sculpted look.
And yet a very organic look. It does not look like if you draw it and you keep the highlight.
The hair specifically, if I would have used a hard eraser, would have had these very distinct white lines, which would have looked more unnatural than this.
Which we leaned into in that episode we did. We wanted those hard lines. We wanted those...
But having said that, this is not an eraser that is your one eraser.
No.
You cannot only use this eraser unless you're doing something very specific. Like, in fact, something like what Minjal did, where maybe she didn't need to, rub out any large area. These are terrible at rubbing out an entire dark area of pencil. It just can't be done. And they can't really do a sharp edge the way that this can. So, for example, her face, the edge... The reflected light at the edge of her face. I just could not achieve that with the kneaded eraser. I needed this one. But for the other sort of more sculpted, softer areas of it, there's nothing that a normal eraser just would not work this way. So yeah, this was quite a fun test to do.
Yeah, I think mostly the first time I heard of kneaded erasers was when people would talk about the tools of the trade and things like making comics and all that. But I think you can get away with a kneaded eraser because at least at the time before digital things, you would almost not rub out all your pencils and it would be fine to sort of keep some there because it would not make it through the reproduction process.
That's true.
Is what I wanted to say, that
the pencils would not show up on the photographic plate that you were making.
Whereas these are in some ways, these are finished artworks that lean into the actual state of things, and Minjal has found out that they are also great fun to use as what's the term? Fidget toys. Just as an example, this is a kneadable eraser that I've had for like 5 or 6 years. I think it's a Japanese.
The Seed brand is actually fairly well known.
It says normal type kneadable eraser for soft pencil and charcoal works. Charcoal is one thing that we didn't try this on, but cleans types and rubber stamps. That's another interesting use, certainly in Japan, where rubber stamps are almost at a personal level quite a bit more common. So this one again comes packed, but as you can see, over 5 years, the Faber-Castell ones we have are quite new. This one started off more tough, and it is still quite tough.
Yeah.
It's
and that's more the consistency that I've used before.
Yeah, this one is quite a...
It's like clay.
Yeah, and this one is more close to a rubber. It's not the same as the hard one. It says easily kneadable, and maybe I can introduce some more moisture into it to make it. This was from Kinokuniya, which we wish was in India but is not. It's non-toxic, and yeah, this is what I was used to. So this is actually kind of a fun new direction for me in terms of what you can, how much pliability, how much malleability, how much sculptability you have.
The erasers we have used before like this, you would not be able to shape them into muscles and things that easily.
No. You would have to hope for the best and just kind of, and then after a while, they sort of end up becoming like the rubbings of this immediately become, in that they become these noodly, ratty kind of full of, and then you just throw them out, I guess. This one, yes, is remained soft and pliable, at least now after the first few uses. We'll have to see how it is over time. Maybe we'll leave this one out and do a stationery time lapse experiment and come back in a few years and say, hey, now it's as hard as a rock. And the question is, do you want to just lean into that? Do you want to put googly eyes on your eraser? Do you want to let it be unmoisturized? And then
Surely we're going to do an episode on plasticine for that.
we have to do one then. We have to get all the googly eyes and all the plasticine, because this was really fun to do, even as just a tool, like I said, to just kind of fidget around with.
What would be fun is if we get modeling clay also from Faber-Castell.
Yeah.
And-
are they double dipping and just telling us this thing is a Kinet gummy idea when it is in fact just plasticine?
There's only one way to find
There
out.
is
And
only-
stay tuned for that.
Yes, and do stay tuned for all sorts of other things, especially for this show, of course, every week, but also our own work, personal work that you can find at the social links that are on screen right now, as well as at inkymemo.com. And do subscribe to the Inky Memo newsletter, where there are many more pliable and gummy and sculpted tales of stationery and other wonderful things as well. This little suitcase is going back into our bigger stationery cases, but not for long. I think we'll use it in its uses, which are limited but intense, let's say. And yes, they do not leave behind
Any residue.
But yeah, please, if you are interested in this and the kind of things we did, please look at our Nataraj Plasto episode, because we had a great amount of fun with that as well. Until next week, when we promise to have more fun, whether you like it or not. I've been Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal.
That is just silly putty.